Hello, my name is Chip Richards, and I'm the founder of the Writing the Story Within mentorship program. I'm beaming to you here at sunset from a little farmlet in northern New South Wales, Australia, to share with you just a little bit about the work I do, and to hopefully open the doorway for you to take the next bold step on your own writing path. Over the past 15 years, I've worked as a professional writer across a wide variety of mediums. I've been a story and a screenwriter for feature films. I've been a script doctor and a story consultant for other people writing feature films and documentaries. I've written articles and stories for magazines and journals. I've written songs and poems. And in recent years, I've written books. And during this time, I've really come to truly honor the role of story in our planet and in our culture. Story has been used and drawn upon for thousands of years as a vehicle for sharing truth between people, as a way of bypassing the concepts that can collect in our head and penetrating right to the heart of the matter of what we wish to share. And I really believe that at this time on the planet, there is a great calling for new stories. There's a great need, in fact, for new stories to come through to sort of weave into the fabric of our society new visions for all that is possible. During my time as a writer, I've come to know a lot of different people, so many people who have within them great stories for what could be wonderful films or books. And yet, without the tools, without the understanding of how to sort of translate or anchor that inspiration into form, many of those ideas and visions for stories go untold. And so that really is the purpose of this work, to actually create a doorway and a supportive arena for aspirational and emerging and even experienced writers to take their work to the next level, to go from having the dream or a vision of a book or a film or some story idea, and to translating that through our own creative vehicles onto the page, onto the screen, and out into the world. And so I look forward to the possibilities of welcoming you into one of the many programs that we have coming up in the coming months. In the meantime, today I'd love to share with you just a short video that I've put together which outlined 12 golden keys of the writing path. These are 12 gems and nuggets that I've collected from my own journey writing over the past several years, in my own experience and in watching and observing and working with other writers who I really admire or see as really poignant voices for the planet. So wherever you are on the writing path, welcome. Come on in and dive into the 12 golden keys today, and I look forward to hearing from you and learning more about the stories that are ready to come through you. It's time. Hello and welcome to the 12 Golden Keys to Igniting Your Writing Path video. My name is Chip Richards, and I'm excited to be sharing these special nuggets of creative possibility that have emerged on my own writing path and in my time working with different authors and writers around the world. I'm beaming to you from the lounge room in a hotel in Perth, Australia tonight, and it's very late at night. And one of the reasons why I'm recording this video at night and late at night is because this is actually one of my very favorite times to write. I used to stay up really late at night, but now I oftentimes go to bed quite early, and then I get up in the middle of the night and I write in those early wee hours, those quiet hours when everything else and everyone else has gone to sleep, when the mobile phone airwaves and the phones and the cars and the trams and the trucks and the planes have all quieted down for the night. Consciousness is quiet. People are dreaming. And I found that waking up in this time and writing in this time are some of my favorite moments in my whole creative path, because you really can feel the energy of the muse in the ethers. So here I am in this funny lounge room of a hotel, and I'm excited to be sharing the 12 golden keys with you. We'll hammer through these because I could spend about an hour on each one of these keys, and in fact I do in a lot of the workshops that I run. But we're just going to work our way through them quite systematically, and my hope is that by sharing and listening to and watching this video, you'll take away a few really key nuggets to taking your own writing path to the next level. All right, here we go. Golden key number 1, and this golden key came to me at the very beginning of my own professional writing career when I was really diving into and exploring the path of a screenwriter and story developer for film. And I went to Los Angeles because I figured this is the Mecca, this is the place where it all happens, and if I'm going to write movies, this is where I got to be. And I went there with my wife. We'd been living in Australia for several years and having a beautiful life there. And we thought, no, if we're going to make movies and we're going to write movies, we got to go to LA. And so I went and I had a series of meetings and interviews with different producers and things. And one of those meetings really stands out strong for me, and that was with a very professional, or very successful film producer and television producer. He had several shows at the time that were live on air. And he came and looked at my rather odd resume at the time and talked to me, and we had a great conversation, really hit it off. And the last thing he said to me was, hey, you know, if you ever move here to LA, I would love to put you to work. I could put you to work on any number of the shows that I got going. So as he's talking, I'm thinking, oh, this is great. This is my doorway. This is my beginning. And then he paused for a second, and he said, but I don't think you should move here. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? Why not? He said, you have a very interesting life. You're living in Australia. You're doing amazing things. You're working with interesting people. He said, far better it is to live an interesting life. Live a life that is rich with experience. And let your stories come from that life, and then bring those rich original stories back here to Hollywood when they're ready. Come here, bring fresh energy to this place, because this place is screaming for new stories and new energy. He said, you come here, you'll get all tangled up in everybody else's thoughts and everybody else's stories. Live a rich life. And from that rich life, rich story will arise. So golden key number 1 really is just that. Live a rich life. If you want to be a writer, a lot of people say you got to read tons of other authors, tons of other filmmakers. You got to read, you got to read, you got to read. And you know, I often have a joke with people that I work with that I've never been really that fast or that good of a reader. I really love to read, but I am actually a firmer believer that the best thing that you can do to start your writing path is actually just to read the book of life through your experiences, and know that every day, every waking breath that you have is a doorway to story. Which leads us to golden key number 2, and that is accept the gift of story seeds. When we have an intention or a desire to write or to share stories with the world, and if we engage ourselves in the rich fabric of our life, sooner or later, in fact, more often than not, sooner than later, stories will begin to emerge from the fabric of our life, from the conversations that we have, from the conversations that we hear in the room next door, or the table next door, or on the other side of the train, or as we're walking through the forest and the whispers of the leaves. Story is everywhere, and one of our greatest, I think, responsibilities as writers and as storytellers is to be open vessels to hear and listen to and accept story seeds when they arrive into our own consciousness, into our own mind. They're oftentimes like those golden whispers of intuition that sneak in between sentences that are much louder going on around us. Those little quiet whispers that oftentimes could go unnoticed if we're not paying attention. These are little seeds of stories that, if nurtured, can grow roots and soon sprout and blossom into fully grown gardens of stories. So story seed, or story golden key number 2 is be open to accepting the seeds of stories. Live a rich life. Open ourselves to accept the seeds of stories. golden key number 3 is really to understand a simple principle that took me a while to get as a screenwriter, but when I got it, it absolutely transformed the scenes and the characters and the stories that I was working on. And that is a very simple truth that says that through our intimate experience is our doorway to universal engagement. Or more simply put, intimacy is universal. And what I mean by that is that when you're first writing a story, there's this sort of feeling like, sometimes there can be a feeling, or I had the feeling, like I had to be like the god of my story. I had to be like the great puppeteer, kind of moving my characters here and moving my plot arcs there and kind of being the mastermind of this story. And I wrote really clever scenes and stories that kind of ticked all the boxes in terms of structural, nuance. But they didn't have a pulse. They didn't really have a life that really made people cry when they were supposed to cry or laugh when they were supposed to laugh. And then one day, out of kind of frustration more than anything, I was working on a scene that didn't have anything to do with anything I'd ever lived, any experience that I'd had. It was two characters that weren't me, and they were experiencing a traumatic event that was different than any traumatic events I'd ever had. But my frustration made me kind of just drop into a time in my life when I had a similar emotional experience. So different details, different circumstance, but the base core emotion was the same. And so I just stopped for a moment and I dropped right into my own experience, my own version of the experience that I was trying to write. And while, like I said, the details were very different, underneath the core essence of the experience, the emotional truth of the experience was the same. And so I took myself to my most intimate experience of that emotion, the emotion of the scene that I was writing. And then from my own connection to my own experience, I then wrote the scene just directly through my own lens of my own experience. And the moment I did that, it absolutely transformed the scene that I was writing. And instantly, this was a sort of a very emotional scene I was writing. Instantly, when people read this scene, it made them tear up and cry. And it became a doorway to a whole new level of writing in the story I was working on at the moment. That every time I went to write a scene that was about somebody else, I would simply drop into an intimate experience of my own that had the same emotional essence. And through that doorway of my own intimate experience, I cracked open the universal engagement of the scene so that everyone, no matter what path they'd been on, could read what I was writing and connect with it. That made it universal. So our 3 golden keys so far: rich life equals rich story, accept the gift of the story seeds, and intimacy is our doorway to the universal. Intimacy is universal. Okay, moving on. Golden key number 4. That is, groundedness is expansive. What are these crazy paradoxes? Groundedness is expansive. So a lot of times people who come into the writing world and they have a message to tell, or they have a story to tell, or some teaching that they want to express in their writing, or they have some greater vision for the scene or the story, it's quite easy to come into the story and want to translate that message or that teaching or that essence or that kind of nugget right away in what you're telling. But today's audiences, today's readers are pretty savvy, sometimes cynical, and they don't really like to be preached at. They don't really like to be told the truth just blatantly in sort of a straightforward preachy manner. They want to hear the story behind it. They want to be led on a journey. And then so that when you share with them the truth, when you share them your message, they're there with every bit of their body and their being. They're already in the truth. They're living it by living your story. And if you do your job as a writer, you oftentimes don't have to even say the truth or the message that you have, because it's obvious in the experience of the story. And the way we do that as writers is by being grounded in our senses. So if we can enter our scenes and enter whatever description or whatever room or atmosphere you're trying to create, and even if it has very lofty ideals, begin with your senses. Begin by writing what are the experiences of the senses of your character or your hero or yourself. If you're writing about yourself in your story, what are the experiences of your senses in that moment? And if you begin by what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're feeling and what you're smelling, if you begin in that sensual arena, those senses then become doorways to what those visions and sounds and smells mean to you as the character or the author, so that it's through our senses we suddenly have a doorway to more expansive messages or truth or experiences. The senses are our doorway. So groundedness, grounded in our senses, groundedness is expansion. Story key number 4. Okay, moving on. Story key number 5. Here we go. This is a really important one. And this is one that really could be number 1, but I wanted to load in those first few because they really kind of lead to this one. That when we have lived a rich life and when we have opened ourselves to receive a story seed and when we have embraced the intimate experiences that we bring into our stories, and when we have grounded ourselves into our senses and we're in our bodies and we're ready to tell this story, the next golden key, and this is a vital step in pretty much anything we do in life, but certainly in creativity, and that is that in an energetic sense or an emotional sense, I like to start with the end in mind. I start with a very clear intention of how I want to feel, and possibly more importantly, how I want my audience or my readers to feel at the end of experiencing whatever it is that I write. So plans change, stories change. As soon as I hit the page, something different might come that might change the specific direction of my story. But if I begin with a very clear intention, a heart-based intention of how I want the overall experience to feel, what I've found is that that's kind of like setting a true north on the compass of my story. It kind of sets the course for my story so that all the impulses and the ideas that I might have kind of feed that basic energetic pulse or intention of the story. So by starting with the end in mind, I'm setting a clear intention for my story. And the other way of saying this is know why you're telling the story. That if there's maybe several things you wish to tell in your story, but if there could be only one, what is that? If you could just leave people with one thing, what would that be? If you know why, if you really know why you're telling this story, and that sits in the heart of your first steps into your story, then that why will really serve as a very clear guiding post for every creative decision that you make throughout the whole story process. Golden key number 5, it is a golden one. Put a circle around it. Okay, moving on. Story key number 6, quite related to story key number 5, and that is start with a plan. Start with a plan, but then I'm going to just put in brackets here, little brackets right here or here, depending where you're looking. Start with a plan and trust the river. Trust the story river. And that is that you have this heart-based intention, and from this heart-based intention you might kind of visualize how your story is going to go. And sometimes, depending on the story that you're writing, sometimes you're free writing and you're just trusting the impulse. You're just diving into that river and trusting it. You're not even trying to plan it. You're just going. And certain types of writing is perfect for that. Other types of writing, you really need to have a plan. You need to kind of like chisel it out. You need to kind of know where you're going. It's like rock climbing or mountaineering. You kind of want to know your route. But even when you're setting a route and it's very specific and it's very clear, like in screenwriting, it's very, very technical writing actually. There's very specific beats that need to be hit at certain times. So we begin with a plan. Some people put them on note cards, some people do an outline, some people do a treatment, some people do all of those things. You start with the plan and you trust the river. And the reason I say that is that, in my experience, in pretty much any beautiful experience in life, but certainly in the creative realm, you have a plan, you have an idea of where you're going, and you take one step. You take one step, and suddenly you realize that you really are in a river. This is not a static thing. This is a living thing. This is like an organic garden, and it's growing. The moment you start stepping into it, it starts to grow and evolve, and you write a couple lines of dialogue, and suddenly, whoa, something new emerges, a new current, a new eddy, a new stream, a new kind of tributary off of this stream surfaces, and you have a choice. Oh, do I want to go down there? If you know your deep intention, if you've settled number 5, story key number 5, and you've started with a plan, you can enter into the story and be open and loose enough to recognize what's a distraction and what's an enriching tributary off of this story river. And you can trust it. You can follow it, and you can allow the impulses to rise in you and fuel you each step along the way. Story key number 7, also somewhat connected to story key number 5 and 6, and that is start right where you are. So you know your intention, you know your plan, and sometimes one of the greatest difficulties I've found that writers have, and myself included sometimes, but so many writers come to me and they go, wow, I've got this vision, I got this idea for the story, I've got this whole thing, I've mapped it out, but far out, I just don't know where to start. It's like I'm standing outside of a giant beehive full of honey, and I don't know how to get in without getting stung. I don't know where's the door. And what I've found in the writing path, one of the joyful things of the Writing the Story Within workshops is bringing people together that have lifelong chronic writer's block, and watching them navigate and blast right through that block and really enter into the river of their writing with grace and ease. And one of the ways we do that is by encouraging people to start right where they are. We can spend days, months, years, lifetimes trying to pick the right story, trying to pick the right place to start in that story, trying to pick just that perfect way to capture that first scene. But oftentimes what I've found is that if I just said, hey, write about this pen, and you went, oh, okay, and I just gave you something, here you are, you're holding this pen, write about this pen, you'll start writing about the pen, and it's brown, and it says ridges.com on it, it's got silver and blah, 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 and you start with your senses, and you're kind of exploring this pen, and then pretty soon what happens as you give your conscious mind something simple to work on that's really basic and has nothing really to do with anything, but it's right here in your moment. You're writing about the pen. All of a sudden what happens is your subconscious starts to percolate up. And whether you're writing about a pen or a stapler or a book or your dream character that you've been crafting for months, what you really want to write will start to emerge. What you really want to bring forth will start to bubble up. Oftentimes it's our conscious mind that kind of blocks those impulses, and because we're trying so hard to do it right that we kind of stymie ourselves. We kind of stump those creative fluid, energetic impulses. And so we want to open those doorways, and oftentimes all we have to do really is just get ourselves writing. And so sometimes what I'll do, if I'm writing about something that certainly isn't about the pen, I might just take 10 minutes to write about the pen, or to write about myself, or to write about this moment or this room that I'm sitting in, or I might walk out and just connect with a blade of grass or a piece of bark or a tree or whatever. And what that does is it just kind of takes the logs out of the river and it opens the flow. It's amazing how this one works no matter what kind of story project or scene or article you're working on. If you can bring yourself to this present moment right here and start writing from here, then you'll find not only does it make you feel better, not only does it loosen you up and open those creative juices, but normally, strangely, amazingly, something from this moment right here will provide a doorway and a link to whatever time, place, reality that you happen to be writing about, or to, or for, in the piece of writing that you're working on or the story that you're writing on. So, story key number 7, start right where you are. Story key number 8, again, brings me personally back into my own work in the film writing world and crafting characters and allowing those characters to speak truthfully, to share their truth in their dialogue, in the way they express themselves. And again, when I first started crafting stories that had characters in them that were speaking, one of my impressions or one of my thoughts as a writer was that I needed to kind of be this puppeteer. I needed to kind of move my characters here and there and get them speaking what I wanted them to speak, what I wanted them to say, that I had my idea of what they should be saying, and I knew what this scene was about. Well, again, I wrote some pretty good scenes, but my writing took a quantum leap when I started to take time to get to know my characters at a deeper level. And normally it started in my own mind, sort of crafting, sort of molding this character based on the function that this character might have in the story. But what I found was that as I got to know my characters better, and as I kind of engaged them at different levels, and learned what they loved, learned what they were afraid of, learned what was their earliest memory, learned what they really wanted, learned what stopped them from getting that, learned what kind of funky little flaws or quirkiness they had. Once I kind of saturated myself in those characters, I could actually just bring those characters into a scene, and rather than sort of projecting them into the scene and telling them what they should say, I would bring them into the scene, and then I would just kind of sit back and quietly watch and allow them to show me which way the scene needed to go. Allow them to show me what is the most authentic way to react when someone does that to me. What is the most authentic way to speak when this happens? Rather than just projecting my own thoughts of what they should say. Really, I began to listen to my characters. I began to honor the characters that I was writing about as genuine living beings. That my role wasn't to tell them what to say. My role was actually to listen and to allow them to speak through me. And when I began to serve my stories in that way, not only did I have some pretty amazing, I guess you could say, imaginary conversations going on in my head, but my story writing experience became very rich personally, because I didn't feel ever like I was alone. I felt like I was genuinely walking through the path of this story with the characters and heroes that were walking the path of this story. So story key number 8, listen in order to speak. Before you inject your own thoughts about the way a character should speak or the way a scene should go, take time to listen. And if you can't get there in your mind, if it doesn't come clear to you, the other way to do this is to spend time with someone who is like your character. Spend time with someone who is like your heroes and listen to the way they speak. Sample the way they speak. And then use that as a basis to inform the real life conversations in your story. Life is very telling, and if we can listen to it, if we can tune ourselves into the heartbeat of the life that's right around us, then it will oftentimes inform us and show us and tell us where we need to go. Story key number 9 really draws from the ancient Japanese martial art of Aikido. And that is a simple principle which says, accept the hit as a gift. Oftentimes early writers, or when you're first stepping on the story path and you're writing stories about characters and heroes that you love, that you want people to love, and heroes that you want to go on to do great things, one of the real reluctancies in writers is to write genuine conflict or to give our heroes genuine challenge that really call them to become the heroes that they're ultimately going to become. We want to be too nice. We want to be really kind to our heroes. We don't want to hurt them. We don't want to put them through too much. And I'm here to say is, in the martial art of Aikido, when someone comes at you with great force, the Aikido master doesn't try to block or push away or avoid that force. What the Aikido master does is the Aikido master turns and aligns with that force, so that that force can then be navigated and redirected into a more positive direction. And so a lot of the martial arts, a lot of the sort of mixed martial arts competitions, the Aikido masters do very well because they can take an attack from any type of aggressor, and they can turn with it and roll with it and flow with it and turn it into a productive energy. Now, in a sort of a microcosmic way, this is really what happens to our heroes in story, that they become the heroes that they are because of the challenges that come to them during the story. And the greater the challenge, the greater the hit, the greater the conflict that moves at them, the more they must find a way to redirect and align with the energy of that conflict and to send it into a positive direction. And so one of the greatest gifts that we can give our heroes is to bring them into genuine challenge. Challenge and conflict reveals who our heroes really are. And so one of my story golden keys for emerging writers is to not shy away too much from challenging our heroes, but to get to know them, listen to them, and then to place them into situations that are going to really call for them to truly be their truest, highest self. Story key number 10, we're almost there. Stick with me. Story key number 10 is another one of those golden nuggets that really applies to life. And that is focus and surrender. There's another way of saying this, which is push and then dissolve, but we're going to say focus and surrender. And these two terms came to me from some studying that I did of the people who founded the Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California many years ago. And they did this great experiment where they were trying to measure the power of intention. And they managed to hook up sensors to the mind of themselves and others. And by focusing their intention, they could move a little needle across a little screen and sort of measuring their brain waves of focus. And their intention behind the experiment was to actually be able to move this needle further and further and further across the screen. And they were in time able to move the needle pretty far, or a little bit across the screen, but what they discovered by doing this experiment was something they never could have imagined. And that was that if they focused, and as they practiced their focus, they were able to get this needle to move up a little bit, and would sit there and would kind of move and hover and hover and hover. And they would focus and they would focus until they just could not focus anymore. And then finally they would just go, I can't do this anymore. And what they found was the moment that they released, the moment that they surrendered, the moment that they went, the needle would often go, and it would go all the way across the screen. That was the biggest leap for the needle, was the moment that they relaxed and let go. And I learned about this after I had learned it the hard way as a writer. Early in my writing career, I used to focus so hard on a scene that I was writing, for example, and I might spend 6 hours or something working on this scene, just slaving away, focus. And then I finally just couldn't do it anymore. I would have to let it go, and I'd go, forget it, I'm going to go for a surf. So I'd close my computer, I'd jump in the car, and I'd be driving down the road, and like 10 minutes down the road, usually during the tightest, windiest part of the road where, the most dangerous, all of a sudden, the whole entire scene would come to me in like a nanosecond. Every piece of dialogue, every look, and every emotional beat of the scene would just arrive in my mind and in my consciousness as if it was just given to me on a platter. It would come all of a sudden. And oftentimes a lot of the issues or the challenges that I was trying to work my way through would just be resolved or dissolved. And what I would get was this sort of full, complete scene. And I would, of course, swerve off the road and, write it up my arm or on the back of a receipt or something until I learned to bring my journal with me everywhere I went. And And I would then go on and I'd come back to my computer a bit later and I would have this fully transcribed scene on my journal already, and I would just transcribe it onto the computer and the scene would be done. And what I learned was that, and it's the same thing basically that the gentlemen and women in Esalen learned, and that is that the focus is necessary. We have to bring a certain level of inertia, which comes really from our intention, story key number 5. We have to bring that level of focus to the scene or to the story, and we have to bring our energy there. But there is a moment where we have brought everything that we can bring, and we have to also let go. And we have to let the universe or the cosmos or our higher self or our unconscious or our superconscious, however you want to see it, communicate back to us sort of a higher wisdom or perspective on what we're writing. And oftentimes that doesn't come until we let go. I used to have this thing where every time I would send a scene or send a draft in for review, I would work on it all night or a few nights in a row, and I would send it, and like 30 seconds after I'd send it, I'd get all these impulses that I hadn't thought of before sending it. And so then I started to sort of like try to trick myself and send it without actually sending it, or send it to myself, and sometimes that worked, but normally the work for a while and jump in the car and head to the surf was really my golden key. And so as a writer, I've learned to kind of flow in these tidal waves, to allow myself to push and bring my energy to the page, and then to know when to also back off and allow the page to come back into me, to bring my energy and then open myself up and allow the muse to infuse and fill and flow and guide me. To know that it's not me. It's not all me that's got to bring this through. I got to take the first few steps, and then I got to allow myself to dissolve into the story and allow the story to carry me. Golden key number 10. It's golden. Okay, story key number 11. We're almost there, just 2 more. Here we go. Story key number 11 is a magic one, and it is a very simple one. And it just says quite simply, produce every day. This is something that I, again, learned very early in my writing career, and it was at a time that I wasn't actually writing a lot. I was traveling. I'd only just recently arrived in Australia, and I just made myself the habit. I used to do this every time I traveled, is I would make sure that I would write in my journal every day. And so every day I would, normally in the morning and often at night, just to capture what had happened. And I found that if I got into a rhythm of writing every day, after several days of doing this sort of rhythm of it would become a little bit monotonous, and then in the monotony of that rhythm, suddenly the extraordinary would start to emerge on the page. Suddenly the magic would start to bubble up as a part of me relaxed, and as a part of me that I had agreed to meet each night or each morning in my writing started to trust a little bit more that I was actually going to be there. That part of me started to divulge and give more of itself. It's sort of like if you have a dog that you take walking each day. You take it for a few days, and then on the 4th or 5th day it knows when the time to walk is, and so it meets you by the door. It knows where you're going. It's excited. It wants to go. It's thrilled to go out and spend that time with you. And I've found that the muse to be the same, and that higher wisdom that comes through us in our writing responds very well to regularity, to consistency. And it doesn't mean we can't be spontaneous. It doesn't mean we can't write at different times, at different days, that we can't bring our journal with us and keep writing. It doesn't mean we don't take days off. But if we can learn to show up, and if we can show up roughly in the same time every day for a little while, you'll be surprised what happens. We start to build a rhythm, and in that rhythm, melody arrives, and harmony arrives, and symphony arrives. So one of the great golden keys that I could really offer you tonight is that wherever you are, just to begin, 10 minutes even every day, just to write. And even if you're just writing stream of consciousness, what's going on for you, you'll start to get in a rhythm of that. And from that stream of consciousness, magic will emerge. Story key number 12. Now, and as I said in the beginning, this isn't a definitive list. It's not like there are only 12 keys to story. These are 12 that I really love. And these are 12 that each one of them has several keys that could revolve around it or support it or off-branch from it. And truly that's part of what the story and the Writing the Story Within program is about, is really dropping in deep enough into these keys so that we can really master them in their own right, but then also follow the streams and tributaries that go off of them. But story key number 12, and this is also a very important one even for young, emerging, and especially for experienced writers, and that is put it out there. When you have a story seed that you have nurtured and you've created something, don't let it sit on your shelf. Don't let it sit in the drawer. Sure, put it in the drawer for a little while, then come back and refine it. That's okay. But when you have something that's come from your heart, put it out there. If you have a desire to write for a magazine, send it into the magazine. If you have a desire to write to a publisher, approach a publisher. There's this sort of great mythology that it's difficult to break into the writing world, that it's difficult to be a professional writer, that it's difficult to make a living or earn a living being a writer. Well, I started writing professionally cold about 14 years ago. Up until that point, I had been a coach of elite athletes, and I'd written a lot, but I'd never written professionally. And one day I started writing, and I decided I wanted to write an article for a magazine. And so I just called up the editor and said, "Hey, I got an idea for a magazine article." And he went, "Okay. Can you send me a little? Can you send me a sample of your work?" And so I sent him a little sample of my work. He said, "Okay. Can you send me a little idea about the story?" Gave him a few sentences about the story. Great. And I had my first article writing story commissioned. Same thing happened to me in advertising world, writing advertisements. Very similar thing happened to me in television writing for TV, writing scripts and developing projects for television shows. Very similar thing happened writing films, feature films, and in the last year or so, very similar things have happened writing books. That the greatest hurdle to getting these pieces out there, the greatest hurdle to getting the attention of a publisher, or to getting the attention of a director or a producer of film, or to getting the attention of the editor of a magazine, is simply the hurdle of stepping past our own self-doubts and criticism to go approach them. These people who are the doorways to sharing our stories with the world are thirsty for, hungry for, waiting for stories. They're waiting for positive, fresh energy coming from emerging writers. They're waiting for new sparks that emerge from real, rich lives. And if you have a life that you're living and you've decided to share a little bit of that energy on the page, and whether it's a story about you or whether it's a fantasy adventure about someone else, if you have something that's worth writing, then it's probably worth sharing. So don't allow yourself to be bound up or wrapped by the do's and don'ts of the editing or publishing world. Just take a step and take whatever step you can to put it out there. Even if it's going to an open mic night of a poetry reading, take a step and feel and hear yourself express your writing. And in doing so, you'll start to open up this reservoir of creativity within you, and you'll start to send it down the mountain to the ocean. You'll start to open up the river of your creative potential. And as you do, you'll see all sorts of potential possibilities for that river to feed the lives of many, and it will ripple back into supporting you to live the life, the rich life that you really came here to live. So that's it for the 12 golden keys. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's now quite a bit later than when I started this, but as I said, this is the golden writing hour, and I love being awake at this time and sort of allowing myself to connect with the muse. So thanks for taking time to tune in with me. And if you're curious about this, if this is connected for you, then I really invite you to explore the Writing the Story Within mentorship more. It really is a wide open doorway to experience yourself as the hero of your own life story, and to share the wisdom and energy of your experiences in the stories that want to come through you. So, have a great night, and I look forward to meeting you in the realms of story.